Hello and welcome back to the Audible Finish, where we discuss the week gone by in the world of wrestling. I'm your host, Dimitri Kalos, and alongside me, as always, is my esteemed co-host, Thanasir. Welcome again, Thanasir.
Salutations and peace. Thank you for having me on the show.
In this week's episode, we have a lot to go through, but to start off with, we want to address some all-elite wrestling news with the signing of Mercedes Mone. And the big question on all of our minds now is, can she lead the women's revolution in AEW? On the WWE side of things, we're going to be discussing Seth Rollins and Cody Rhodes accepting the tag team challenge and the American Nightmare returning fire with a slap on the People's Champ, along with the developing matches on the overall WrestleMania 40 card. Later on, we will also discuss which WrestleManias we believe make up the Mount Rushmore of WrestleMania events. If you are enjoying the podcast and have a moment, please like, share, and subscribe. On that note, Thanasi, let's move on to our first topic of this week's episode, and that is Mercedes Mone becoming All Elite. She obviously debuted on the AEW Dynamite Big Business episode, and it's fair to say the impact has been felt, but obviously AEW has this tendency to have really big signings that can plateau if not handled correctly and not riding the wave of the momentum. Firstly, what did you think of her debut appearance, and what are your thoughts on the future now for the women's division in AEW?
Well, see, here's the thing. Sasha Banks was one of the leading figures in the women's revolution in WWE. So it should only logically follow that at least there's the potential, if not the likelihood, that she's going to do the same as Mercedes Moné in AEW. What I don't want us to see, though, and I want to be very clear about this, is I don't want the candle burning too quickly or candle burning from both ends, and how I think they would go about that, or what I mean by that is put the title on her too quickly, let the novelty fade, and then she kind of drifts off into obscurity, kind of like Miro did, if we can put it that way. In contrast, I don't want them to wait too long to pull the plug or to strike the iron, because they have someone that is a real megastar on their hands and probably the biggest women's star on the planet today. Yes, Toni Storm has got the best gimmick in AEW, but we need to find the right way to transition towards having Mercedes Moné as like this real sort of flag bearer or the number one heel in the company very soon.
I think that there is a lot to take potentially from the way they handled CM Punk when he first started, in that give her some matches to sort of get her feet in the water, then give her a high level feud that isn't necessarily for the title to really get her across and really develop her stardom, and then strike and then give her the title. I'm not saying they need to wait 7, 8 months the same way they did with Punk or however long it was, but certainly I think parachuting her straight away into the title scene is a bad idea because they've done that with a few of their stars. And I think what happens is they get parachuted into the title scene, lose, and that is just as bad as them just winning it in terms of the momentum's dead. Because now everything that you would have hoped to see for hasn't. Like I remember with Ruby Soho, she debuted, she had a title match very soon after, she lost, and she sort of very quickly settled into the mid-level card of the women's division. I look at Deonna Purrazzo, who just recently lost to Toni Storm. It almost feels a little bit like, where do we go with her? So, is there something to be said about that? Same way you're raising that question of trying to keep her away from the titles for now and actually just build up the novelty of her being in the company?
Look, I think so. And I think that one of the benefits that they have is you can have these long feuds because as the sort of heel boss character, she doesn't need to be wrestling every week because she's not a workhorse, if that makes sense, right? So prolonging these feuds and just having one big blow off match after many weeks of confrontation, in ring segments, backstage segments, you can go through two or three opponents and make it through even 6 months relatively easily before eventually transitioning towards the main event title scene.
If they handle her correctly, is there the potential of this being the first time truly that the women's division is seen as on par with everything else going on in AEW?
Hopefully, I will say yes, but it's a bit there is a bit of a stark difference, and I think it would take a long reign for her to be able to pull that off. And one person doesn't make a division, but they could build a division around her, if that makes sense, right? And bring other marquees around her, elevate people, create new champions. So she would need to play a role as both as a main event star, but also as kind of like that mentor on the off as well. And I don't think she's actually got the best reputation for that because she's been seen as antisocial in the past in the locker room.
The thing I consider is that, and I'm going to go back to him again because to me this is a sort of similar level signing for the women's division. When Punk came in, there was a way to put the spotlight on certain guys by just sharing the ring with him. And it wasn't about them winning the match. It was about them having their moment to show the audience who these people are. And there was almost a way in which sometimes with these high profile signings, you shouldn't have them lose too many matches. Like I think of Bryan Danielson. He's a guy that's been very generous in his time and he's lost to a lot of different people. But the problem is he's lost to a lot of people and it sort of diminishes the value a little bit of beating him as it being something incredible. Whereas I look at, say, a guy like Jon Moxley, in the 4 or 5 years he's been with the company, he's only lost so many times, and every time he's lost, it actually has felt like a big deal. So I think with Mercedes Mone, there is something that they should make sure that she's not losing that much, and that at least in the start, that she's winning a lot of her matches, and just putting that spotlight on certain wrestlers in the women's division that other audiences who might gravitate now to AEW just to see her may not have seen before.
Can I use an example?
Please.
Maybe we can make her the women's version of MJF. Specifically, what I mean by that is limited amount of matches, but high percentage of winning.
Yeah.
That's what I would like to see for her. And I think she'd be well suited to it.
All right. Well, let's move on to the next discussion point, and now we're going to be turning over to WWE. And we've got another update in the Bloodline Cody Rhodes saga that is developing towards WrestleMania 40. And we saw on the last SmackDown that Seth Rollins and Cody Rhodes accepted formally the challenge issued by The Rock for a tag team match, which looks to be the main event of night one at WrestleMania this year. Before I move on, Thanasi, how did you feel? How do you feel now about that sort of confirmation?
So we've dragged it out a little bit, but it's not to the point of just, oh, finally we're here for most people. It is a little bit like that for me. But I guess where I'm sitting is we were expecting this to happen. It's not a shock that it happened. That said, right? So let's just take that as a given. That said, we're still going to have Seth Rollins, Roman Reigns, Cody Rhodes all pulling double duty over WrestleMania weekend. And we've got The Rock wrestling, who is a part-timer in a main event spot. So if this were not Seth Rollins' first ever WrestleMania main event, there'd be a lot of disappointment on my part, and a lot more than there already is, because they're just taking up another main event spot and another WrestleMania match that they didn't need in the first place. So I guess where I'm coming from this is, in a previous life, before the development of two-night WrestleManias, this is the sort of match that you would have put on maybe on the Raw before, like on the Go Home show, to really kind of push that home of like, let's sell this bloody pay-per-view, let's get there. Or even the SmackDown before, because it's only 2 nights ahead.
They would have done it at the start, let's be real. A match like that, they would have just put as the opener rather than on a TV episode.
All right. If you ask me, what value does this add? It adds show value. It adds mainstream attention, and it adds somewhat stakes. However, what does it take away? It takes away a main event spot that could have gone to a first-time WrestleMania main eventer, example, Bayley. It takes away the value of seeing Cody and Roman go head to head, because the last time they did so was at another WrestleMania in a singles contest. So now they're going to be sharing the ring on a Saturday, but then again on the Sunday, which means it's a phenomenon of diminishing marginal returns. And it feels as if it's clutching at straws. Just like, what can we possibly do now that we don't have CM Punk and Seth Rollins main eventing WrestleMania to at least make up for that lost star value? Let's put in The Rock. So that's my opinion on it. I would have been perfectly keen to see Seth Rollins and Drew McIntyre in singles main event this night one.
Yeah, look, I don't actually disagree with your point about other matches getting that spot, but what I'll say is that the dynamic, in my opinion, the dynamic that has been brought in now with The Rock has actually made this more compelling to me. And you say the stakes isn't minimal, is kind of slight. I would argue it actually adds a lot, because what's happening here is the promise of a potentially level playing field for Cody Rhodes when he goes in for his rematch. The idea that he can perhaps go in and avoid the Bloodline, which is the only reason really that he lost last year, I think adds stakes for him. It adds the promise of him getting a fair shot at the title that he didn't really have last time. Now, I say that, I'm saying the stakes is the promise of him maybe getting there. I actually think it would be better if they lost that match and he had to actually go up against all the odds and he still managed to overcome it, because then I think that really makes him look strong. And it would be nice for once for Roman Reigns to make someone else look strong instead of someone making Roman Reigns look strong. But I do accept your point that if it is a shoehorned in match, this was not the organic plan, and there is something annoying when that happens, because you want it to feel like the card has been set up and everyone's with a two-night Mania. The whole premise is when one main event was going to go to the ultimate final match, you give another chance for other people to just have that moment. Moving on from that point, The Rock insulting Cody Rhodes by saying that there is a generational divide between him and his older siblings because he was a mistake, and that leading Cody Rhodes to actually slap The Rock back, finally getting his vengeance, so to speak, from the WrestleMania kickoff event when The Rock slapped him. What do you think about this little addition into that beef that's forming between The Rock and Cody Rhodes, which some would argue is actually the more interesting dynamic happening on right now than Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns?
Well, I just think axiomatically, like the premise is wrong, because Cody Rhodes has 3 years difference with his sister. So
With
how could
one
he,
sister.
with one sister?
The
So
other sister that The Rock was referring to is, I believe, the one that's biologically related to, like, completely to Dustin.
to Dustin
Golder.
Rhodes. But the thing is,
So I
look,
think those are the two he was talking. I think he made a bit of a mistake.
no. He didn't make a mistake. What he was doing is he was constructing, if I can put it this way, a story, pun not intended. He was constructing a story so that he could create an insult from the story that he created. For example, I might say to you that you're the second born in our family, that mum and dad always told me that they never wanted someone else, therefore you are an accident, right? Now that's not true, right? Like, this is all in kayfabe. But the thing is,
Is there
when it
something you want
comes
to tell
to
me, Thanos?
yes, you're a mistake.
Uh,
Basically, that's what I'm trying to tell you.
I was a happy little accident. Go on.
I guess where I'm going with this is unless we try a little bit more to use to blur the line between kayfabe and reality in wrestling, you're not going to actually get the sort of satisfying kind of, oh my God, I can't believe they said that on television moment from the fans. And it's mostly because there's not a lot of scandals that we've got in Cody's life, right? He's pretty clean. So what are you going to reference? You want to bring up the Young Bucks? You want to say the only reason you're relevant is because of a couple of good Christian boys?
Making
Do you
some
want
noise.
to do you want to make a reference to Tony Khan? That's it. That's the sort of thing I think that would get a pop from The Rock.
See, but the problem is that would get a pop from like 5% of the WWE audience. The thing that they don't want to, the AEW doesn't want to admit, or maybe they are willing to admit, is that in terms of the casual audience, they haven't broken into it anywhere near as much as WWE has. So there
Can
is a
I
problem. Like I remember seeing Punk, he made a reference to the you can't be fighting people backstage. That's not right in one of his opening promos when he came back. And very few people got it. Like the internet wrestling community understood it perfectly. But if we're talking about the casuals, they won't get it.
can I put this to you? And this would have been a very simple fix, right? Just to make that promo cooler. For a babyface, what hurts more? Someone insulting you or someone insulting your family? Your family. So he could have said, or he might have been more powerful, is he could have said, Dustin is an accident, right? He said that you and your sister are 3 years apart, and he could have insulted Dustin Goldust, the future Hall of Famer. And that would have made him attack. In the same way that Cody Rhodes, he brought up the family, saying the family would be ashamed of you. And that's what provoked the slap.
Uh, I don't think it would have made sense for him to insult Dustin because The Rock wrestled with Dustin. Like they're probably quite tight. Like it would be weird for him to insult him now. Like I even called him a future Hall of Famer. Like that's high praise coming from a guy like The Rock. You can't like I think the whole point of him is like I think the point he was trying to raise is essentially, and it's ironic because he's saying this to a 39-year-old man, but he's sort of adding the element of, you're just a young pup that doesn't belong in our league.
Anyway, look, it felt a little bit flat for me, but and I'm not sure where else they can take. I don't know what else there is to squeeze out of this aside from just good promos. The story has reached its maturity. It's what kind of little seasoning, can we add to the story ahead of the actual pay-per-view?
All right, well, let's dwell on some of the other Mania matches that have now started to form. So we have Sami Zayn booking his place at Mania by winning the gauntlet match, and now he will face Gunther for the IC Championship. It looks like we're getting Randy Orton versus Logan Paul, potentially with Kevin Owens involved as well for the US Championship. Jey Uso officially challenged his twin brother Jimmy to a match to settle the score, and we heard the announcement of a 6-team ladder match for the undisputed WWE tag titles. So the Mania card is starting to form around with the mid-level matches compared to the main events and the world title matches that have been set. What are your thoughts on these matches that have now sort of started to come to fruition?
Well, on all of those, let's go through them very briefly one by one. So I'm stoked that Sami Zayn is getting a singles contest and is going to have a championship match at WrestleMania. That makes it 2 in a row. That's great for him. Now, see, here's the thing. Because I know his and I believe in his promo ability, he will make us believe, at least temporarily, that he's going to defeat Gunther or that he can defeat Gunther. That doesn't mean that that's the booking decision they're going with, but I think that they can tell a very, very compelling story, and I think their styles are going to mesh quite well together. With the US title scene, I'm actually kind of disappointed because I thought that this was the right opportunity to give LA Knight his nice WrestleMania moment, his victory, And I'm disappointed that it's not him going up against Logan Paul. And also, I'm just disappointed that Logan Paul's getting an extension to his US title run because he has defended it like once or twice. I might be wrong there, but in any case, I'm just kind of disappointed with that. Putting LA Knight instead um, with AJ Styles, I think is a bit of a waste because we could have put him in a title match. But that being said, AJ Styles, Kevin Owens, and Randy Orton, they could have had some action there in their own little triple threat and made things interesting. Maybe some kind of a number one contenders match, or even just like some kind of a no disqualifications match, maybe like a gimmick match, something like that. I think that they could have pulled off something okay, maybe with Shinsuke Nakamura, put him in there, and had like a mid card battle.
I actually
On
don't mind the pairing of LA Knight and AJ Styles because I think this is going to be LA Knight's sort of first big pay-per-view win, if that makes sense, singles wise.
I'm
Because
thinking of it more from the perspective of opportunity cost of what have we paid in order to get here, and we've paid a championship title win at WrestleMania for a very good mid card match. It's a net loss.
I understand what you're saying, but the other thing that I was thinking about is that with hindsight, you can't have so many of your titles changing hands at the one show because then it's like there's a complete lack of continuity from that show to the next. So, and I say this because I look at like I feel Bailey needs to win the championship at
Mm-hmm.
Mania. I feel that Cody Rhodes needs to win the championship at Mania. I
Mm.
feel that Seth Rollins, regardless of how it happens, needs to drop the title at WrestleMania. So when you've got a lot of your high-profile championships changing hands, even the tag titles seem in jeopardy now because with five other teams to compete with, there's no logical reason to say it's definitely going to stay in the Judgment Day's hands. So I look at all these things and I'm like, we can't be changing all the titles at the one show. So which ones do you decide to keep on the current champions? Which is why I look at Gunter and say, you know what? Maybe he will retain again for a second Mania in a row. You look, and in this case, it looks like a Logan Paul. I'm not going to say I'm happy about it. I'm not thrilled. I'm not happy at all, really. But you can understand maybe giving him that win over a bigger name just to sort of keep it going. So I think that's the only problem I have and why I'm kind of okay with the way things are turning out as right now.
I hear you, and I actually think that you're spot on as to the explanation for why they're doing it, right? They're setting it up so that they don't have to change too many championships in one weekend. I genuinely think that's the thought process that creative has. Back to you.
I thought you were gonna like give a retort, like, but I'm still not happy about it.
Oh,
Which,
look, I'm not happy about it,
yeah, and to be
but
honest, I
you
feel the same
understand it,
way.
right?
Yeah, of course. Look, to be honest, again, I agree with you. Like, there's no reason in my mind why you can't set up the next year at WrestleMania 4. Because at the end of the day, WrestleMania is meant to be the culmination of that year's plans. It very rarely actually turns out that way. It's usually only like one or two things really paying off. But yeah, I think that there's something interesting to come with this. All right, well, before we get into our Mount Rushmore discussion, I just want to quickly give a shout out to the latest inductees in the WWE Hall of Fame class for 2024. So we have Thunderbolt Patterson, the US Express, which is the tag team of Barry Windham and Mike Rotunda. Notably, Mike Rotunda is the father of the late Bray Wyatt. And as the celebrity entrant, so to speak, in the Hall of Fame class, we've got Muhammad Ali. Fancy, any thoughts you want to have on any of these inductees?
You might want to slap me, but I genuinely thought that IRS was already in the Hall of Fame. Like I genuinely like it must be a Mandela effect for me or something, but I actually thought that he was already there.
So did I, actually. I don't, yeah, I thought he was as well. Maybe he is?
I'm looking this up right now, but look, while I do so, I'll say this: Muhammad Ali, I knew that he wasn't already, but I'm surprised that he wasn't because he was sort of like he was a figure in the first WrestleMania. How have they not already inducted the bloke? Um, Bull Nakano. That's a fantastic induction that we've got. So the class that we've got forming with the celebrity of Muhammad Ali, the tag team of the US Express, Bull Nakano on the women's side, Paul Heyman on the non wrestler or the non in ring wrestler side. It makes me wonder who's going to be the marquee sort of world champion that they've got left.
Do you think they're going to have one?
Do you think it's just going to be Paul Heyman?
I think it might be Paul Heyman. I think it's going to be a Philadelphia thing. I think they're just going to give it to him because I feel like if they were going to have him, look, I think the one example I can think of that could probably fit, even if they put them in now, is maybe a Bray Wyatt, a posthumous recognition of
I actually thought
one
that
of
he
the
would
most
be the
talented minds.
first person to be announced and to be the number one.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I genuinely think they've built this around Paul Heyman to be the main guy, and it's been a long time since we've had a non-in-ring wrestler as like the focus of the class. So it would be a bit of a change of pace, but I feel like there's no better place if you're working to do that than a place like Philadelphia, which is so ingrained and so linked to the personality of Paul Heyman. Have
Well,
you looked up?
I will confirm that Mike Rotunda, IRS, was not in the is not in the Hall of Fame. So this is going to be his first and big induction.
Well, congratulations to Mike Rotunda for that. We're now going to move on to our WWE Mount Rushmore segment, and this is all about WrestleMania pay-per-views, and we're discussing the best of the best. WrestleMania has been WWE's biggest and most historic event for the past 40 years, serving up numerous iconic matches and moments, though only a handful of them truly stand out as some of the best wrestling shows of all time. In this video, my co-host Thanasi and I are going to discuss the WrestleManias that really are the best of the best, as we determine which editions we believe belong on the Mount Rushmore of WrestleMania events. Now, there are multiple factors to consider, like legacy, match quality, memorability, but as this is our own ranking, we also can't ignore subjective measures like personal enjoyment, nostalgia, things like that. We will get deeper into it as we discuss the various candidates for this list, and so without further ado, Thanasi, I have to ask, are you ready?
Am I ready? Of course I'm ready. Let's get into it. What are we waiting for?
Now, we have recently ranked every single WrestleMania in 4 separate videos, and I encourage everyone to go on our channel and watch them. Quick spoilers, we will be using the Manias that placed in our top tier, which was all time, as our candidates for this video. And these are WrestleManias 3, 10, 17, 19, 21, 22, and 39. Thanasi, where would you like to start?
Well, perhaps we can begin from what I think personally is a shoe-in for one of the top 4 spots, and that is what is largely considered the greatest WrestleMania of all time, WrestleMania 17. The reason is, well, there are many reasons, and because there are lots of good matches, right? When we were going through our ranking videos, one of the trends that I noticed is that a lot of WrestleManias have got maybe 1 or 2 standout matches that kind of like these are the ones that represent the best of this edition.
Yep.
You think back though to this WrestleMania, you've got a piping hot main event in Stone Cold versus The Rock, which marked the end of the Attitude Era. You had TLC 2 with the Dudleys, Edge, and Christian, and the Hardy Boys, where they absolutely stole the show, even though it was never theirs to steal to begin with because they weren't in the main event. You also had some nice matches in the mid card, specifically in the semi-main, where you had Undertaker versus Triple H, where they were kind of just thrown together, but they really freaking stole the show. And a match that had no business being as good as it was in Shane McMahon versus Vince McMahon. Like the pop for Linda getting up had no right to get it, but just everyone was insanely hot for it. And you look even, Angle versus Benoit, another
Great
fantastic
match.
match,
Great
right?
match.
And you look at the number of matches that I'm listing out here, all I can think is they really just had an absolute cracker of the night where that they've kind of like all the stars aligned, if I can put it that way.
Yep.
So this one, I believe, is a very well-deserving number one spot, or at least belonging on our Mount Rushmore.
And I see, I'm just going to throw it right out there. I'm putting it in. This is the George Washington, I think, of our list. Not even a question for me. This is still my favorite WrestleMania of all time. And I just think with every point you made is correct. And it's just, I feel like it's one of the most rewatchable events because there are different levels of enjoyment. Because when you have a technical masterclass in a match like Kurt Angle and Chris Benoit, you have the quintessential main event in The Rock versus Stone Cold Steve Austin. You have one of the great innovations in the TLC match that is to this day one of the great tag matches that I've ever seen. It's up there in my list of favorite tag matches ever. Even something like the hardcore match is just a big ball of fun. And as you said, Shane and Vince, the Linda McMahon pop, like we don't need to understand it, but it's there and it was a thing. So yeah, I think it completely fits in among our top four among this Mount Rushmore. All right, well, let's discuss some other candidates. And I want to give a quick shout out because I don't know if we'll make it, but I certainly am a favorite of it, and that's WrestleMania 39. I think obviously this will go down as the first Triple H run Mania, which I don't know if that gives it an extra boost, but it certainly is just a notable thing to mention. I still think that night one is almost a perfect event in the way that's structured, especially with the Sami Zayn, Kevin Owens victory over the Usos at the end to cap it off, is just a perfect moment. And then I even look at night two and I go, that's also a great event. Obviously, the Roman Reigns victory is a bit demoralizing, but I still feel that there is great value to the show, which has matches like Gunther versus Sheamus and Drew McIntyre in the triple threat for the IC Championship. I still think that's a classic IC Championship match. You've got even a grudge match in the form of Rey Mysterio versus his son Dominic, which I think is just it's storytelling done to perfection when it comes to like family dynamics. There's just so much to talk about. Even Rhea Ripley versus Charlotte Flair, one of my favorite matches of all time at Mania, definitely one of the greatest women's matches for me. Like, there's just a lot to talk about in terms of like in-ring quality, I feel, with this Mania. What do you think?
I 100% agree with you on the point, particularly on the night one show, because I'm looking back at the card, and you had some really standout matches there. In particular, the women's world title match or the SmackDown women's title match, but also just that perfect story and perfect storm of Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn against the Usos. I just like, what on earth more could you want out of that sort of show? With night two, there was a lot more that we could have wanted and that we did want, and that was just to have Cody finish the story. Yes, I know that we have stuck with him up until now, but let's just think back to what it was like at the time. It felt like we were all shortchanged, and it's actually thoroughly disappointing that it left that kind of a sour taste, because the night two felt like Vince sort of shitting on us basically when Triple H just gave us pay-per-view of the year on night one. So I think maybe not 100% decided on putting it up there. It's definitely worth the shout, but at this moment, I'm not inclined to include it in our Mount Rushmore. It's a close fifth.
All right. Yep. Let's move on to discuss the earliest Mania that's among our candidates, and that is WrestleMania 3. Now, obviously, this is probably the first iconic main event of a WrestleMania, the one that really sticks out. It's the one they still use in their opening title sequence with the body slam. It's got the iconic, like the first iconic legendary Mania match, in my opinion, of Ricky Steamboat versus Randy Savage for the Intercontinental Championship. It's probably the first truly great WrestleMania, or at least according to our list, we certainly considered it the first truly great WrestleMania. This obviously is a bit hampered down by time. I don't think it's as rewatchable as some of the other events that we've got coming up by virtue of it was a different time, different style. It's a 12 match card, and really only two matches are notable and are remembered. It also has the value of legacy behind it, though. So, where does this one sit with you, Thanasi?
See, for me, yes, for historical reasons, it's definitely up there. And I don't actually have a massive issue with the fact that it's two big matches because, as I said before, the trend while we were doing these videos is that that's generally how it works out. Generally, turns out to be just two. But that having been said, you've got a massive sports entertainment moment, probably the first ever WrestleMania moment in the body slam. And then you have a fantastic professional wrestling match between Ricky Steamboat and Macho Man Randy Savage. So I actually would probably rank add in on top of those two, the historicity of it. I would probably put it slightly ahead of 39 in consideration, but perhaps not quite there on the top four spot. But when we consider, I think we may actually give it, for historical reasons, a top four bump. But let's continue going through our shortlist.
Let's do it. And the next one I've got down, WrestleMania 10. Now, this is to me the Bret Hart Mania, and it's the Shawn Michaels Mania. And what a beautiful duo to headline a WrestleMania. Obviously, Bret Hart opened the show with a match against his brother Owen, which he lost, and then he closed the show beating Yokozuna for the WWF title. And it's one of those great moments where it actually felt like the locker room endorsed this champion. Not Vince McMahon, not the company, but the wrestlers backstage were the ones who were like, okay, yep. And it's emblematic of the fact that the symbol of guys like Alex Luger and Razor Ramon carrying him above while he hoists the title. I think it's just a great image. I think it's up there with some of the other iconic Mania images. And let's not forget the classic ladder match of Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon for the IC Championship. And I'm sensing a little bit of a theme that great Mania events tend to have great Intercontinental Championship matches too.
Can I just make this point exactly on the Intercontinental Championship that this one, it made it feel like the IC title was a massive deal, right? Because it was around this time, especially during the new generation, where they really emphasized that the person who had the IC title was very firmly a number two. During the golden era, because Hogan had that sort of monopoly on it, it was not quite a consolation prize, but you could definitely see the difference there. Whereas here, because Bret Hart was a former IC champion, you could see that now it's the preparation championship, and for that very reason, for going to Bret Hart, it represented also a changing of the guard. The guy who was the workhorse IC champion is now being endorsed as the heavyweight champion of the world after 9 years, basically, of Hulk Hogan running the show. Capital on top of that, where you got three absolute bangers on this card. This new generation peak, I think I want us to put on our Mount Rushmore in the top four.
All right. Well, let's discuss some of the other candidates before we get it, but I have a feeling I'm going to agree with you there. The next Mania I want to discuss is WrestleMania 19. And this is a Mania that I actually rewatched recently. And I remember we watched it together, Thanasu. And it's got big highlights and it's remembered very fondly as well. obviously you got like a great match between Shawn Michaels and Chris Jericho. You've got Rock Austin for the last time. You've got Brock Lesnar versus Kurt Angle, which in like outside of the botched shooting star press is a very good match. Where does this one sit for you?
This one is also in that argument for greatest of all time. I don't actually think of this one as the number one, but I do think of it as the number two. And with that rewatchability, what I noticed was the following. You had the star power in Rock versus Austin, going out for the last time. You had the mat-based wrestling between Brock and Kurt Angle, who of course have amateur backgrounds, and it really did feel like a very mat-based style match. And you also had the wrestling, or like the pure sort of entertainment wrestling, steal the show kind of wrestling between Shawn Michaels and Chris Jericho. You had a lot of other stuff on the card, but I think those three are the absolute standout matches. And you can't really disagree with the fact that when you've got these guys on the card, I mean, Triple H and Booker T, I think they kind of let me down a little bit, to be quite frank with you. The booking decision the approach was not what I wanted it to be. Nevertheless, in spite of that fact, everything else was pulled off very, very well. So I actually want to put this on Mount Rushmore more comfortably than I would put WrestleMania 10. What about you? Do you agree?
I agree, and I think, to be honest, I think we should make this the Abraham Lincoln of
Okay.
our list. As you said, the second best. I think it's a Mania, if I'm being honest. It's one that it doesn't come straight to mind, but the more I think about it, and when I actually watch it back, I always go, yeah, I get it. I think it, because you have other Manias that are like revered as like just very clearly the best. Sometimes there are those Manias that are very good and they're up there, but you just don't necessarily think of straight away. And I think 19 for me is that it takes me a little while, but once I think about it, yeah, it belongs. So I'm happy to put this in on the list and we'll add it now.
Fabulous.
The next Mania I want to discuss is WrestleMania 21. Now, this, like WrestleMania 10, for me, almost feels like the beginning of the next generation, with the crowning of John Cena and Batista, and even a guy like Randy Orton having the high profile match against The Undertaker. It feels like this is the beginning of the next generation of stars for the company. And how can I forget as well, Edge winning the Money in the Bank. These four names basically made up the main event scene for the next 3, 4, 5 years in the company. So I think there is something to be said that it has that value. Obviously, Batista getting the victory over Triple H, John Cena getting the victory over JBL, Edge winning the inaugural Money in the Bank ladder match, Angle Michaels
I was waiting for
classic
you to say
match.
that one.
Like there's a lot to this, and I wanted to add here 8 match card. I've said like 3, 4 matches already, and it's an 8 match card, which means basically half of the show is already just fantastic. What do you think?
Look, everything you're saying cannot be refuted, right? When we're going off feel, there's a kind of a mixture here because when we talk about the standout matches, you go to Shawn Michaels versus Kurt Angle, absolutely stealing the show, and then you've also got the Money in the Bank match, right? The first ever, the inaugural Money in the Bank match. When I think of Batista and Triple H in the main event, when I think of John Cena versus JBL for the world title, they didn't steal the show as far as their match quality, but it did represent a real watershed moment. And I'm just thinking here where what we've said so far, we've discussed WrestleMania 3, which was the best golden era WrestleMania. We've discussed number 10, the best new generation. We've discussed 17, the best Attitude Era. We've discussed 19, which is in that early Ruthless Aggression. And now at 21, I think that this night represents the transition from what I call the early Ruthless Aggression to the late Ruthless Aggression. So we're getting all these sort of big moments of transition, but also just the local peak if I can put it that way. So I think this one's got a very, very strong argument for that number 4 place. Perhaps we should discuss the final WrestleMania on our short list before we decide what gets the 4th spot. Do you agree, or are you keen to put 21 in there immediately?
Well, I would like to discuss our next and final candidate, and that is
Excellent.
WrestleMania 22. So just off the bat, I just want to say 21 and 22, going back-to-back years, very strong. Good on WWE at the time. This one had another great Michaels match, but this one was against the Boss in Vince McMahon. Edge and Mick Foley had, for me, it's what I consider a classic WWE hardcore match. To me, it's the first example I think of it when WWE hardcore match. And RVD winning in the Money in the Bank, Ray winning the World Championship for Eddie. Like, there are some great feel-good moments and almost like, yes, our guys are winning and they're getting set up as well. And then you have John Cena beat Triple H in the main event. But outside of that, like, to me, this is a great match, and it's one of those manias that I love to watch back. I really do.
There is a really good rewatchability. I mean, it's got some drawbacks as well. I mean, the Undertaker versus Mark Henry casket match was not the best. But I mean, there was another good match that you didn't mention because there's so many good ones in Trish versus Mickey. That was, at least at that time, considered possibly the greatest ever women's match at WrestleMania. So there's a lot of prominent matches on this card as well. And at least as far as wrestling, I think it's got a stronger argument than number 3 for historical reasons. And 21, I guess it's kind of like exactly as you said, on par. So you've got that 19, the 21, the 22 in that string. Ruthless Aggression era had some very, very strong WrestleManias. Where are you leaning for going in the number 4 spot? Because we've decided 10, 17, and 19. Take the top 3.
It's tough. If I'm being honest, I do think WrestleMania 22 belongs more than the rest of the pack.
Okay.
That's where I lean. I think that it's just, for me personally, it's the Mania I rewatch back probably more than the rest of them. And for that simple reason, like, again, we said this is going to be a personal list. At least from my account, that's where I would probably lean towards from the rest of the pack. What about you?
Well, see, here's what I'm thinking. I'm disregarding 39. It was a great card, but I'm just disregarding it for that top 4, which brings me down to this following train of thought. If we put number 3 in there, then we have a golden era, a new generation, a attitude era, and a ruthless aggression, one from each of the 4. But this is our list. We went around for the golden era, and that was basically, if I can be a little bit harsh, because we're trying to make distinctions between lots of great WrestleManias, it was a 1 match card, maybe 1 match plus 1 moment. So that's why I want to drop that off. And given that we're comfortable with that, I'm happy to toss up between 21 and 22. And if you say for 22, I'm happy to concede on that one.
All right, well done, WrestleMania 22. You're getting in. So that means that our final Mount Rushmore list is WrestleMania's 22, WrestleMania 10, WrestleMania 19, and as the good old captain, we got WrestleMania 17. Let us know in the comments below if you think we got this Mount Rushmore of Mania events correct, or if there are some of your favorites that have missed out that you think belong on the list. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Well, that brings us to the end of this week's edition of the Audible Finish. Next week, we're going to be discussing the fallout from AEW's TNT Championship I Quit match between Christian Cage and Adam Copeland, along with the developing saga that is the WrestleMania 40 card. There's plenty to discuss. We're in Mania season. It's all getting very exciting. I'm very much looking forward to it. Thanasi, great to have your company as always.
Thanks for having me. It was such a good talk.
And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Until next time, we hope everything you do is just too sweet.